Hey everyone, it's 10 Types again. I'm talking about card design. I'm really enjoying talking about it, and it looks like you guys are too. I've been getting a solid chunk of views, so that's nice. And speaking of my channel, I guess I'd really appreciate if you enjoy this type of content, if you subscribe if you want to see more. Obviously, you probably want to wait till you're more into the video to see if it's your style of content, but all of your support really means a lot to me, so I really appreciate that. But if you don't know the overall idea of the series, we go through, it's out of 40. Each card is ranked out of 40 and how well it's designed. 10 points for each of 4 categories. How interesting is it in a vacuum by itself? How interesting is it within the context of the game? How interesting is it or fun to play against? And how balanced is it? And then there's room for an other category as well if you need to add or subtract some points because of other situations. I was considering adding one for this card, but I decided it wasn't really that meaningful. So we're going with the good old 40 points here, seeing how many points this gets. And if you didn't see my other videos, I covered Lugia, which wasn't that well designed, and Close to Experiment, which was quite well designed. And Mew VMAX is a really interesting card. I think it's a pretty controversial card, but let's get into it. And this is also the first time that I'm taking a look at a card, and I'm looking at its pre-evolution as well. So the pre-evolution for Mew VMAX, which is Mew V, has a moderately interesting attack, energy mix, allowing you to accelerate energy, not that important. Really what we're looking at here is Psychic Leap, allowing you to shuffle this Pokemon and all cards attached to it into your deck. But what matters most of all here is Mew VMAX. Of course, that's what we're taking a look at. We see the Fusion Strike battle style. So what does that do? We'll get to that in a moment, but first of all, you see its attack, Cross Fusion Strike. Choose one of your benched Fusion Strike Pokemon's attacks and use it as this attack. So you only need 2 colors, no matter whatever the cost of that Pokemon your attack, whatever the cost of that attack of the Pokemon you're copying is. So if you're copying Mew V's attack, you still need to pay the 2 colors, even though it's only 1 energy, but then there are some more expensive ones, so you save a little. Generally, this is a very payable attack cost as well, 2 colors, very, very good. And then Max Miracle here, doing for 2 Psychic, you do 130, and it hits through effect, so that's pretty cool. One thing to note, if you have a Mew VMAX in the active and one on the bench, you can use Cross Fusion Strike to copy the one on the bench without needing those 2 Psychics, just having 2 colors, which is interesting. Obviously, this lends itself to a toolbox style deck, which is really interesting. I think toolbox decks are really cool, and we have a few options here. We have Psychic Leap, copying the Mew V, which is essentially a healing hit and run style attack, which is really interesting, as well as hit through shred style attack. It was what some people would call it, Max Miracle. 2 solid toolbox options, and that's really nice. And obviously there are some other ones, but overall toolbox decks are cool. Keep in mind this one really needs to be mostly Fusion Strike Pokemon in play. You can maybe have some other engine cards, but you want a lot of Fusion Strike Pokemon in play. This may remind some of you of Mewtwo and Mew, or Mew EX, or the other Mew EX, or the Baby Mew. There are a lot of Mew cards that copy attacks. This is one of them, but it's very limited to Fusion Strike Pokemon, which we'll get into. But overall, this looks really interesting. You also see Free Retreat, which is kind of cool on the V and the VMAX. That's not too common, but certainly interesting. It makes it better, but it's interesting. And then also a bit on the low side of HP, 310, and 180 is also on the low side. It's not that bad, but it's something to keep in mind. But both having Free Retreat, Weakness to Dark, nothing too crazy here. But the ability to make a toolbox deck, really interesting. Gives it actually a 9 out of 10. And so that's really cool. Looking at it in a vacuum, assuming there are some options that are pretty solid. Now we're going to look at it within context so we can see some of those options. First of all, to power it up, we have both Elisa's Sparkle, allowing you to accelerate Fusion Strike energy, which is pretty solid. It's essentially a rainbow-style energy, only attachable to Fusion Strike Pokemon, of course, so probably just your Mew VMAXs you'll power up that way, as well as double Turbo energy to be able to attack for 1 energy attachment. You do less, but it's not a big deal. And I realized there's a few cards I forgot here, one of which is Power Tablet, which allows you to do more damage. Realistically, it's not that important, though. But really, we see the attackers here. There's also another card that I don't have here, or a Koryo, allowing you to take less damage. But those two, they're just simple damage modifiers. They're nice additions, but they're not that impactful. But looking at the attacks we can copy, we have really 2 other attacks in addition to the Mew VMAX line attacks. We have we'll start with Genesect here, which has 210, and then this Pokemon can't attack next turn. That's that. That downside isn't that bad though, because you have free retreat, so you can get out pretty easily. So that's pretty nice. And then you also have Meloetta doing 70 for each Fusion Strike energy attached to all your Pokemon. So if you have 4 Fusion Strike, you can hit 280. The one notable thing is you can actually hit this turn 1 going second if you release a Sparkle. Oftentimes you won't be able to get 4, you'll only get 3 Fusion Strike energy. So you're also hitting 210. So this presents a bit of a problem. When you're looking for a toolbox style deck, you're looking for Pokemon that have different uses. And these are just 2 attackers that essentially are the same attack cost because you're copying them for 2 colors. And they do about the same amount of damage. Now, Meloetta can do more, but it's still very basic, just hitting damage. And it can do less as well. Obviously, you'd always generally choose to do Genesect if you don't have 3 Fusion Strike energy attached. You can attack next turn, but as we said, that's pretty negligible. So you do have the other options of Mew VMAX's hit through attack Max Miracle, as I mentioned earlier, but it's pretty generic, right? It's not that impressive. And then Psychic Leap, a hit and run style attack, but it really doesn't hit that much, and you're removing your attacker from the board, which isn't exactly what you want to be doing. So really, you're just going to Genesect V, unless you have 4 Fusion Strike energy, in which case you're going to Melodious Echo. And so I know what you're thinking. Actually, this might not be what you're thinking. But I think something that's interesting to and very important to consider is, what about other options? But that's the problem. There aren't really other options. There are a few that are just not that good. There are notably, let me think, there's Oricorio, which I mentioned earlier, allowing you to take less damage, but its attack to copy is pretty bad. There's Ice Cube, attack's bad. I think there's Glaring Mr. Rhyme V, attack's bad. And Excelgor, bad attack. They pretty much all hit some damage, but less damage than Genesect or Meloetta, so you never choose to use them. In addition to that, Genesect has an insanely powerful draw ability. I was considering doing an episode on that, and I still might. It's so good, though, and it really encourages you to just play Fusion Strike Pokemon, meaning that your whole deck is Genesect, Meloetta, Mew. Maybe, as I mentioned before, that Oricorio, which isn't that important. But Genesect, Meloetta, Mew, very basic package. This toolbox deck isn't much of a toolbox deck anymore. This is really like the only way to play it. It's certainly the strongest. Being able to hit really massive amounts of damage, very fast, consistent. It's just very good. It's a bit underwhelming in terms of how interesting it is. It just hit. You hit into your opponent's Pokemon, and then you do it again. There is Psychic Leap, which of course allows you to kind of heal, but it's not that good. It's not going to help you much. So realistically, you just hit them and KO them. It's kind of boring. So it's not that bad though. It's still a toolbox. It gets a 5 out of 10. This one was hard to rank, probably the hardest of all the categories. It's not, I don't know, it's a bit of a letdown, certainly from the interesting in a vacuum, 9 out of 10. This is a letdown. It's not bad. It has some options. Certainly Max Miracle, Psychic Leap allow for some cool options, and there are a few other techs. Mew VMAX itself isn't a bad Pokemon. You still have cool things, but it's a bit underwhelming. 5 out of 10 is not bad by any means, but it's not that good either. But let's look at how fun it is to play against. And this is not good. It's not very fun to play against, I'd say. What makes something fun to play against is having interesting counterplay. And of course, the last category is balance. And the balance does have an impact. I'm trying to take the balance aspect out of it, though. But quite frankly, this deck is very consistent with Genesect, Genesect V. And so people play Path to the Peak to counter this. Of course, countering a Genesect isn't countering Mew, so Path to the Peak isn't exactly a Mew counter, but it's played quite a lot, mostly to counter this deck, and that's kind of annoying, as well as certain other ability lock cards are occasionally played to counter this deck, but they're not as effective as Path to the Peak. And so you see Path to the Peak getting played more, and that's just annoying for everyone. It's not really helping anyone. It's just annoying. And then we also see Yveltal, another counter Pokemon. This one a bit more interesting and thoughtful, but not that interesting. It discards 3 special energy from your opponent's Pokemon. And as I said earlier, you'd have Elisa Sparkle in Fusion, which provides Fusion Strike energy, as well as double Turbo energy, and those are pretty much all your energies. then your opponent can just Yveltal them all off, and then you lose because you can't really recover special energies. Of course, you can be careful with your resource management, but it's still not that interesting. Yveltal is kind of a bit of a brain dead counter, and it either works or sometimes it doesn't work as well. You can play Psychic Energy to counter this counter, but really it's a very strong tech, especially if you play quite a few Yveltals, and maybe Crushing Hammer or Flannery or some other energy denial or other disruption, then your opponent really doesn't have much of a chance. But that's not interesting. It's just stopping him from doing anything. And so that's kind of boring. There are a few other counters, and these counters all see a lot of play. Maybe not Midina as much, but Drapion V and Midina are essentially the same. They attack for free pretty much against Mew VMAX, and they one-shot it. So, with weakness, but they both one-shot it. So that's pretty boring, right? You just take the KO. Midina's a single prizer stage 1. Drapion's basic multi-prizer. So what you want to play? Probably Drapion is a very easy tech. A bit more versatile. I think there are some interesting aspects about Drapion, but in this matchup there aren't. The Mew VMAX player doesn't really stand a chance. If you play 2 Drapion, you're always going to beat Mew. Drapion's just an amazing prize swing, super devastating for Mew, and same thing with Midina. Midina is very bad for Mew as well. These aren't very interesting counters, and they're so strong counters. And really, if you're not playing any of these, you're going to struggle unless you have another route where you can just win. Quite frankly, Mew VMAX is not a very interesting deck to play against because both players' paths to victory are very straightforward. No matter what you're playing, you can be playing the craziest deck in the world, but against Mew VMAX, your win condition is probably pretty straightforward. Or shut off as well. Fusion Strike Energy I didn't really talk about, but it stops effects of abilities done to Mew VMAX, or to the Pokemon it's attached to, which is probably Mew VMAX. So Mew VMAX is immune to so many things. Its Return cost is free, which is really good for obviously being able to switch out, so you can't really poison it, confuse it, stuff like that. You can't trap in the active anyway either. Even if you increase its Return cost, it's still going to be able to get out. And also, you can't ping it with Inteleon or anything because of Fusion Strike Energy. So the counters are just kind of boring. And they're good, but it's not that interesting. It's getting a 3 out of 10. I was considering being more harsh. It's not horrible to play against, but it's not that fun. Lastly, moving on to balance. Is it balanced? This is a hard thing to judge. Genesect V is insanely strong, and it's played almost exclusively with Mew VMAX, as well as Meloetta is pretty much ours. Is often played in that deck as well. But the Mew VMAX is good on its own, very good, but at the same time, it's carried a lot by Genesect, and also some of the other Fusion Strike package cards. You could argue that there are only a few really good ones as opposed to a lot of pretty solid ones. So if they had chosen to go that route, it would have been just as strong. More like a Mewtwo Mew Tag Team GX style deck, which is a bit lower of a power level, but having more options. So you could say that if they had gone that route, and we're just looking at Mew VMAX, this is a bit of a weird point, but Mew VMAX you could say is still overpowered. It's kind of hard to judge in a vacuum, so you really need to look at the Genesect. It's not that well balanced. Some people would say this deck's horribly balanced, and the deck I'd say is, but it's not unbeatable certainly. And Mew VMAX itself isn't that overpowered. I'm giving it a 4 out of 10. So that's, it is what it is, right? It's not broken. But it's not great to play against. And as I said, Genesect is absurdly overpowered. It's so good. When it came out, I said it was Shaman EX combined with Zacian V, which it is. And so pretty much Mew VMAX gets to draw like half a stack turn 1, and then hit massive damage. So if you look at Mew VMAX as like a Zacian VMAX or something like that, then it's overpowered. But it's not. It's its own card. And, well, it's kind of its own card. It doesn't really work without Genesect, but if you look at Mew VMAX's own card, it's somewhat balanced. So where does that leave us off? It's 21 out of 40. That's not bad. That's pretty middle of the road, surprisingly. A lot of people hate this card. Some people love this card. I think this fits. It's not that badly designed, especially looking at the other cards around it, which are like kind of badly designed as well. So they kind of take a bit of the blow away. But Mew VMAX is really, really good. But it's pretty interesting as well. So I'm interested in hearing your thoughts, and also on this series. I've enjoyed talking about these cards though and analyzing them. I got a few more, but I'm interested in hearing what cards you're interested in learning how they're designed and stuff like that, and interested in seeing me analyze. As I said, I enjoy this a lot, but I hope you enjoyed. As I said, I'd really appreciate if you like and subscribe. And as always, I'm excited to see you in the next video.